It's your Catholic Drive Time
with Joe McClane and EmilyiAlcaraz.
Mary Caprio is joining us right now by Zoom chat. She is the adjunct faculty at University of St. Thomas in theology and is an associate fellow at the St. John Paul II Foundation, certified in fertility care as a fertility care practitioner for the Creighton Model System. Also, she attended the University of Texas for her undergraduate degree in nursing, Loyola University in Chicago for her master's degree in nursing, Franciscan University of Steubenville for her master's in theology, and the John Paul Institute in Washington, D.C. for her master's in theological studies with an emphasis on bioethics, marriage, and family. Obtained her certification in fertility care through the Pope Paul VI Institute in 2013, and in 2019 received a certification in bioethics for the National Catholic Bioethics Center. So that's a mouthful, Mary. Good morning to you, and thanks for being a part of the program.
Good morning and Happy New Year. It's great to see you.
Yeah, praise be to God. You look very nice. If anybody can hang out with us on the live video streams, you'll be able to see Mary Caprio and the team here. It's really good to have you on, Mary. But the conversation, I think, is an important one. It came up last week. We had a guest on the program, and it was a big part of their journey where they weren't able to get pregnant. And the wife really wanted IVF. The husband was conflicted. He got his uncle, the priest, involved and had to do the difficult task of explaining why the church teaches that IVF is actually considered intrinsically evil. And I know to a lot of people who struggle with fertility, that probably feels like a punch in the gut. It feels shocking. You're taking the one thing we have away from us to be able to have children. I thought you were supposed to be pro-life. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a guest on who could tell us, why does the church teach that IVF is intrinsically evil, and maybe give us some alternatives? Mary Caprio.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I mean, I think first and foremost, what you have described really is a beautiful desire on the part of couples, right? To have a child, to have a baby. It's what marriage is for, and God has blessed that abundantly. And so the desire is a good one, but it matters how we actually move through and achieve that desire, right? So the end does not justify the means. And so although the object is good, the methodology by which we move towards that goal is really important, the way we do things. And so I think it might be helpful for your listeners to actually hear what is the methodology of in vitro fertilization. And from there, then we can look at the objections, because I think it becomes really clear why IVF is seen as problematic to the church when you really drill down onto the steps that we need to take. IVF is a reproductive technology, as I said. In the 70s, we called it test tube babies. And I think that's actually a more accurate nomenclature, if you will. And the culture has gotten very good at taking a hold of language and making it its own, so that we are really deceived in a way. So what happens in IVF? Well, we need the matter to make what our goal is, right? And so we need the ova, the eggs of a woman, and we need the sperm of a man. In order for IVF to obtain the ova, the eggs of a woman, a process called supraovulation is used. And a woman is given large doses of hormones to actually cause her body to produce multiple follicles and eggs. Now, normally, every month, a woman creates one follicle, one egg, usually. Sometimes if you're gonna, preparing for possibility of twins, you might create 2 or 3, but that's more rare. In IVF, when you are hyperovulated, you actually produce upwards of 10 to 12 follicles, and 10 to 12 ova are produced. And this is not without risk, right? These large doses of hormones can cause blood clots, can cause strokes. The ova actually have to be removed via a needle biopsy guided by ultrasound. This is not a non-invasive process. A good harvesting of ova would bring forth about 10 to 12 ova. And then those ova are made available on the outside of the woman's body and placed into a place where they can be fertilized, usually a type of petri dish. I want to mention just a couple of other possible complications to this hyperovulation, because up to 35% of women actually experience complications from this dimension of IVF. Ovarian cysts, rupture of ovaries, increased future fertility issues, and even the possibility of death. So now we have the ova, we have the matter from the woman. Now we need the sperm. And the sperm from the man is obtained usually through masturbation, and usually utilizing pornographic materials, because the sexual act is not usually involved in this. The sperm and the egg are put together in the petri dish, sometimes injected into the ova, and embryos are hoped for at this point. And so if we have 10 ova, we will possibly come up with 10 to 12 embryos. Now, that's an important kind of piece to think about, because why would you want so many at a time, right? Well, the reason why we want to generate so many at a time is because the process actually isn't very successful. And so we don't want to have to go back into the woman to remove ova again and again, right? It's an invasive process. It has side effects. It has problems like any surgical procedure would. And so we want to have spare embryos. Again, a problematic term, right? When we believe that an embryo is a person, that it has everything that it needs to become a mature, active, full, functioning human being. All of us were embryos, right? Embryos have everything that they need to be who they're created to be. So now we have embryos. Now those embryos are actually assessed for quality control to make sure that those embryos are actually healthy. There's level 1, 2, and 3 embryos. And think about this. This is a microscopic being we're talking about, in which we actually take genetic material from that little person and test the embryo for the quality of its cells. This actually reminds us that embryos can repair themselves.
Wow.
And so we're really talking about a little person, right? So there's level 1, 2, or 3 embryos. Level 1 are very
healthy.
healthy.
Hold that thought, Mary. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but that's someone's got to do the dirty work here. Mary, set up what is IVF and sort of what are the mechanics of it and what's involved. And already we're starting to see the problems that are involved with IVF. But one of the reasons why we also wanted to have this conversation with you, Mary, by the way, welcome back to the show, is last week another story came up on the same day we were having the conversation with Kevin Wells. It was Adrian who picked up that story. Adrian, really quickly, what was that story? It was an IVF-related incident.
Absolutely, yeah. So I saw this article and it really shocked me. It was about a woman who had just given birth to a baby who was only 3 years younger than her. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That was the headline. So I reached into it, and apparently the baby was conceived 27 years ago, and the mother was only 29 years old. And so that means that her child is only 3 years younger than her in terms of conception. And so that really struck me, and I was really shocked by it. And so that's what kind of set the catalyst for me reaching out to you to book you for the show.
So this was a case where we had an actual embryo, so a person in conception, stored
Frozen
in a freezer someplace, and then 27 years later pulled out, implanted in a surrogate, and a child is born. Let's talk about the morality. We have about 10 more minutes, 11 more minutes in our conversation with you, Mary. Let's talk about the real moral implications of IVF. Mary Caprio.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the huge issues with in vitro fertilization is those embryos that are called spare embryos, right? We create 10 to 12, we insert 3 to 5. Most of those embryos don't make it. I mean, IVF at its best is 50% effective in creating a live birth. And so 80% of embryos are destroyed. The ones that are not used are frozen through cryopreservation in tanks. We have over 2 million frozen embryos in the United States.
2 million. Wow.
Germany and Italy don't have this problem because they do insist, despite the fact that they allow for IVF, they do insist that all embryos that are created are implanted. So they don't have this collateral damage here. But this is a huge issue. We have human persons that are frozen, throughout the United States. And so, yes, frozen embryos, huge issue. It's not the only issue that's problematic, but it is a life issue, right? We're supposed to be solving this awful issue of infertility, and yet we're creating another life issue with frozen embryos.
Emily?
Would you like me to go through some of the other kind of objections to IVF, or do you want me to?
Please do.
Yeah. So I think probably the main reason why we really feel like IVF is problematic is because it undermines the meaning of the sexual gift. And I want people to hear this because the Catholic Church really reveres sexuality. And that's why it's reserved for marriage. It's reserved for a stable family unit that has the ability to take care of the life of a child, the education of a child. IVF says that intimate sexual self-giving between spouses is not essential to the generation of new life. It says the self-communication between spouses is on the sidelines. And that's ridiculous. How could that be, right? How could that not be central to the generation of new life? And I think alongside that, it says that it's okay to manufacture life as if it were a commodity in the laboratory. And this is really the denigration of the dignity of the human person. It's production versus procreation. You know, procreation involves man, woman, and God. Production involves things, objects. And human persons are not objects. They're never objects. Human procreation requires on the part of the spouses responsible collaboration with the fruitful love of God, says Donum Vitae. And IVF is not about collaboration with God. It's my project. It becomes my project. And so I think that is very problematic. Also, we talked about the fact that, you know, IVF requires masturbation on the part of a man. And this is always problematic, right? It's always a violation of the gift of human sexuality. And so there are unseemly sides to this project, which nobody really wants to talk about. And then another objection, and these objections are really from the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and I love the way they put them out so clearly for us. The fourth objection violates the exclusivity of the couple's marriage covenant because they allow a third party, the laboratory technician, a group of medical professionals, to actually impregnate the wife, albeit artificially, in place of the husband. And so we're replacing the marital act. We're not assisting the marital act, which is what the church would encourage. There's also a risk of multiple births, which puts mom and baby at risk. And there's also an elevated risk of birth defects for the children that come to be. I mean, big time. Something like 6-fold increase in the possibility of birth defects. And so those are, from the top to bottom, the objections that the church has to in vitro fertilization. And I would hope that the next question would be, so what do we do?
Yes.
Or what do we do? Because it is unfair. Although, you know, I do love the idea that that so many of John Paul II's writings have said things like, you know, nobody has the right to a child. You know, a person, you know, we don't have a right to a person. That ended with slavery, please God, right? And so what couples have a right to do is to really enjoy the beautiful gift that sexuality is, the gift of one to the other. And then God blesses them with a child. And then John Paul II says, you know, and if the blessing of a child isn't yours in terms of a biological child, then you're called to love more. And how do you love more? Well, you know, adoption, giving a gift of life in another way. But there are things that infertile couples can do medically as well to assist the marital act. And some of those things are treating the underlying causes. You know, so many women that go to fertility clinics, they don't even try to find out. The physicians, the nurses, they don't even try to understand what is wrong with this couple. Infertility is not normal. Infertility is a problem, and a problem that we really need to address. And so what's the root cause?
Absolutely.
Technology addresses that. And I'm a practitioner for the Creighton model system. And the Creighton model system is kind of the medical record, if you will, for NAPRO technology.
I was wondering what would be the morality of adopting frozen embryos. And so I think that's kind of the question that I was thinking, because there's all these options. Like, for one, we can adopt a baby. For two, NAPRO technology. I remember hearing when I first heard about NAPRO technology, I was talking to a friend of mine who is studying to be a veterinarian. They're like, yeah, whenever we have a dog who has like worms, things like that, most of the time we won't fix the problem. We'll just give them pain medication because they're dogs, but they're not humans. Humans, we should fix the underlying problem. What is the morality of adopting frozen embryos? And can you talk a little bit more about NAPRO technology?
We have about 4 minutes to go with Mary Caprio.
Okay, thanks. First of all, frozen embryos, horrific collateral damage of in vitro fertilization. Is it licit to adopt frozen embryos? Well, the church hasn't specifically commented on the actual process of embryo adoption. And yet, embryo adoption includes in vitro fertilization. And so, theologians continue to argue about this. There are wonderful theologians that think embryo adoption is something that is licit, that is okay to do, because the sin has already kind of been committed. And yet there is another sin that is being committed with the in vitro fertilization. When we do embryo transfer, when we actually do an embryo adoption, you have to unfreeze the embryo. I have no idea what impact that has on the human person. And then we're transferring that embryo into a uterus that is not their own mother's, which actually is like an organ transplant. So the risks, again, are higher for loss of life. And then, all the other complications that are related to in vitro fertilization. So, I've heard, Father Tad say, he thinks that it is not licit. And I've heard other wonderful theologians that are very faithful to the teaching of the church saying, well, maybe it's not so bad. I kind of go on the side of Father Tad, again, with a heavy heart. Trying to understand what is better. And I don't think there's a great answer. I think Father Tad actually has a beautiful suggestion for couples that have frozen embryos in a lab. He says, a wonderful opportunity exists for you to actually establish a trust for those children. So that their life will be maintained as long as is possible. Because many of these embryos are just abandoned. And then the clinic has this option as to whether or not they should discard the embryo or again.
That's tragic. That is very tragic. Mary Caprio, as we have about a minute left before we have to say goodbye, I don't have a PhD, I'm not a scholar, but I do remember, the ends don't justify the means. We all learned that as kids. And ultimately, I think we live in a day and an age where we begin to rationalize a lot based on our own personal wants and desires. Not to say that that's a bad thing to want children. That's a good thing. But at the same time, I think the ends don't justify the means here, and we must seek alternatives. But we're out of time. Mary Caprio, thank you for being on our program and shedding some light on this difficult topic. We're very grateful to you.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
Join us right back here tomorrow morning for Catholic Drive Time.
Thank you for joining us on your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.